The cookie recipe we're going to do today is really fun, and we'll do a few variations. I'll talk about many more variations. It is really, you're only limited by your imagination with this cookie dough, which is awesome. It's a rolled sugar cookie dough to start, which is one of the things we're actually not going to do today because that would be an entire class on its own. If you want to do rolled sugar cookies with it, I'll talk about it briefly, and I also have the recipe with detailed instructions on my website, which is chefalina.com, and that has the cookie dough recipe and the frosting recipe. What we're going to do today is we're going to start by making the dough, and we're going to use some of it before we chill it. If you're doing rolled sugar cookies, you make the dough, you chill it for a while, then you roll it out. This dough is really forgiving. You can use it before it's chilled, when it's chilled, halfway chilled. And this is kind of, I'll show you, I don't know which screen to go to, but there you go. Some of a variety of stuff that we'll do today, and then we'll talk about other things that you can do with it. So yeah, this is, I mean, with all cookie doughs, the mixer makes it easier. You can definitely do it without one, but you're gonna get your workout. So does everybody have their ingredients assembled? I'm assuming what you need. I'll run through it real quick. I have all of mine here. Quick little tip, something we do in restaurants that's so important to me. I have it tattooed on my arm. I don't know if you can read it. It says mise en place, which is having everything weighed out, measured, and ready to go before you start. Sometimes it seems like an extra effort, but it actually is faster and kind of ensures against mistakes because you can double check your weights and your measurements, and then you're ready just to go. So I have my all-purpose flour, 4 cups of flour, 8 ounces or 1 cup of sugar, 2 eggs. I have an extra egg here for later just in case. And my 12 ounces of butter. That's the most important stuff we're going to start with. Then we have salt, vanilla, and cardamom. The cardamom is optional, and that's one of the ways that with this recipe you can actually customize it a lot. Cardamom I love. It's used a lot in Scandinavian baking, and it just gives a nice little extra. People may not even know what that flavor is, but makes it a little more elevated than a plain sugar cookie. You can use orange zest, you could use cinnamon, you could use nutmeg, almost anything you can imagine you could sub in or add to the cardamom to change the flavor. And we'll talk about it a little bit later when you're making, to make something like these peppermint ones, candy canes, you can add some peppermint extract to your dough and flavor it that way. So if everybody wants to start, everyone that's baking along, we're gonna get our butter into our mixers. If your butter is not room temperature, it's just going to take you a little bit longer. If it's not room temperature, I would suggest cutting it up into little chunks before you add it to your mixer. So we're going to get it's 12 ounces, which is 3/4 of a pound or 3 sticks of butter. This dough, by the way, also makes really good tart dough. If you want to make tarts, like a fruit tart or something, you make it according to the sugar, the rolling directions, which is the same way we're making it. It's just that you chill it in the refrigerator before rolling it out, and it makes a great tart dough. So you're going to get your butter into the mixer, and you're going to add your sugar. I'm only going to add half because my mixer's first speed is pretty high and I don't want to wear it. I'm going to put half the sugar in first. You're going to get your sugar in, get your butter in. We're going to cream it all together. You want to scrape down the bowl a few times as you're going, and just, you want it all completely mixed and a little bit fluffy, but we're not going to overdo it. We don't incorporate too much air. I'm going to get mine mixed, and then I'll show you a close-up real quick so you can see. So I'm just going to lower it, scrape down my bowl. Somebody's mixing. When you add your eggs, you want to go one at a time, or if you've broken them up, you can go even less. And the real reason for that is just that if you add your eggs too fast, like with any cookie dough, your butter and eggs are going to separate, and you're going to have this weird kind of curdled looking mess that's hard to bring back together. So if you go slow, you avoid that happening. I always crack my eggs into something else first instead of directly into the bowl, because if you get shell in there, it's a lot easier to pick it out. Okay, just like that. And I got a piece of shell. All right, so now I'm gonna add just one egg and mix. You're gonna mix until it's completely incorporated, the first egg, scrape it down, throw your second egg in, do the same thing. Go ahead and preheat your oven to 350. If you're using a convection oven, you would want it to be at 325 if your fans are on. Once you have your butter and your eggs mixed together, again, I'm going to take it up and just scrape it. This is where I like to add my flavorings, my vanilla, whatever extract. Different recipes, cake, cookies, a lot of times they have you add at the end. You actually get better flavor if you emulsify it in with your fat. So if you add it with your butter and your eggs, it's just they're kind of flavor carriers, and you get a better flavor out of whatever you're using. So I always add it at this stage. So I'm going to add my vanilla, we'll mix again, and then we can add our dry ingredients. I love hearing everybody else's mixers. And then you can add your anything, all your dry. So if you have cardamom and your salt, put it together with the flour. And depending on your mixer and the speed of your mixer, I would suggest doing this a little bit at a time, so that it is not all over you and your counter. Sometimes what I'll do actually, like right here, is I'll put some in and start it with my paddle a little bit before I put it onto the mixer. So there's not quite as much loose flour floating around. And then give it a little mix. The other thing you can do, a trick actually, that we use a lot in commercial bakeries with the big mixers, although we use plastic bags instead of a towel, is if you have a lot and you're afraid it might kind of go everywhere a little bit, is take your towel. Just make sure you don't let it get caught up in the motor there in the paddle, but if you hold it around the outside, that will keep any flour from going anywhere. That's pretty good. I'm gonna just keep adding a little bit at a time until you have all of your dry ingredients incorporated. I am actually using, someone had a question about gluten-free. I don't know if anybody on here is doing it with gluten-free flour. If you are, if you want to unmute, chime in, you can. I'm actually doing this with gluten-free flour today, just so you can see that it really doesn't make a difference. And because CJ, who owns Boston Appliance, is gluten-free, and I'm going to leave these cookies for him. If you need to, as you're mixing, if you find you have pockets of anything or your dough's coming too high up, you know, just drop your bowl, scrape down a little bit. You can never really scrape your bowl down too much. When you're pretty much done, again, this might depend on your mixer a little bit. Mine, I still have a little bit of dry stuff left in the bottom of the bowl. I know it's going to be pretty hard for me, even with the mixture, to get it all incorporated. I can try one more time, but then I'm going to show you we can turn it out because we're going to be putting it onto the counter to break up the dough anyway, so we can finish kind of incorporating it then if we need to. Does anybody else have questions while we're waiting?
Yes, hi, this is Marie, and I'm in just late. And
Yes.
I only have your recipe with me, but I didn't see anything about baking soda and baking powder.
There is no baking soda or no baking powder in the recipe.
So, oh, I see. So it's just exactly what you say here.
Yeah?
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yep, because it's basically a rolled sugar cookie dough. It's just this dough, you can do other things with it. So you're gonna start, if you miss the beginning, you're gonna cream together your butter and sugar, just like a regular cookie recipe. Then add your eggs one at a time until it's all mixed, and then add all of your dry ingredients until it's all mixed.
So it will work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like.
Yep.
How does it raise itself?
From the eggs. And because this is a sugar cookie dough, they don't rise a lot anyway.
I see. Okay.
Yep.
Thank
You're welcome. Good question.
Can you overwork this dough?
You can. It's funny. I was literally just going to talk about that. Any dough where if you're using gluten-free flour, you actually kind of get rid of that problem. Overworking dough, any kind of cookie dough, cake, anything you're baking, it's actually the gluten that gets overworked as a protein that will start to get tough if you mix it too long, which is why when I said you get towards the end and there's that tiny bit of, if there's a little crumb on the bottom, you can stop if everything is mixed together, and we'll just add that by hand. If you go too long, you risk overdeveloping the gluten, which gives you a tougher end result. No, usually, most of the time, if you rest your dough, you can kind of counterbalance that. And this dough, a lot of the variations, we're gonna rest in the fridge anyways, so that kind of helps with that. But yeah, anytime you're baking, you do want to always err on the side of under mixing rather than over mixing. You want to see that? Okay. So here you can see all this kind of dry stuff. I'm just folding it in, covering it up. If you have paper, you can actually use the paper to help you. Wax paper, parchment paper. You really could use even saran wrap if you wanted to. And as you do that, and the more you work with it, and as it's sitting, it's going to start to come together more. So now I have this kind of one whole piece. You can tell it's sticky, but it's really not wet. Once you have it all together, I find the easiest thing to do, you can just make it into a rectangle or a square to divide it up. And then from here, we have lots of options. So I'm going to cut it into 4. You don't have to do exactly the same. I'm going to leave it there and we'll talk a little bit about next steps, what we can do. So if you're going to do rolled sugar cookies, at this point, you're going to take whatever piece of dough you have, flatten it into a disc. The thinner disc, I'm a fan of flattening it to maybe an inch or so, because the thinner it is to start, the less work you have to do once you start rolling. And you're going to wrap that disc in plastic or parchment and put it in the refrigerator. The directions on my regular rolled sugar cookie recipe says an hour. You can get away with less than an hour. You can get away with a half hour, but it will also keep in the refrigerator for a week. It will keep in your freezer for months. So it's a great dough because you can make it ahead of time and have it to pull out and use anytime. Another option and something that we will be going over next is rolling it into a log, either putting things inside it, around the outside of it, putting it in the refrigerator and turning it into slice and bake cookies, which again, about a half hour in the fridge you'll be able to slice them. It'll keep same for a week. It'll keep in the freezer for months, and then you just slice them off to bake them, which is great. do chocolate chips or nuts. I'm just going to show you that because this is really easy. To do chocolate chip cookies, which they come out to be, they're not a, this is not a soft chocolate chip cookie or even a chewy one. This is a crispy chocolate chip cookie, like a shortbread, like a chocolate chip shortbread. So to do those, you're just going to take your dough, you can flatten it out a little bit, and move these to the side so for that close-up view you can see. If you're doing 1/4 of the dough, I would do about a 1/2 cup of chocolate chips, but there's no rules. If you like more chocolate chips, use more. And you can use any kind of chocolate chips you want. And you're just going to put them in and fold them into it until they're kind of evenly distributed. So, another one of my favorites is with nuts. You can use any kind of nuts. I have pecans here. I really like sandies, you know, pecan or pecan sandies, depending on where you're from. To do those, you want your nuts chopped up. So you could throw them in the food processor if you have one, or chop them by hand. The finer they are, the better it's going to be. I have this funny little chef. Oh, you know what? I have a big chef knife in here. And again, if you're taking 1/4 of your dough, you're going to do about a cup of chopped up nuts. You could do less. I don't know that I would do much more, but a cup is, that's a pretty high ratio for that amount of dough. It's almost equal, 50% nuts, 50% dough. And it makes a really nice, like a little, like a pecan sandy or a little pecan shortbread. So you're just going to take your nuts, get them really chopped up. There's not really a lot of rules with this dough. It's very forgiving. You're not going to ruin it if they're not precisely the right size, or you might like them finer, or you might like them a little more chunky. And I'm just going to take, kind of like I did with the chocolate chips, since the nuts are already on the counter, I'm just going to take a piece of my dough, flatten it out, squish it right into them, flip it over, get the rest, and just fold it. You're going to need you're just going to mix until it's all really well incorporated. These are fun to do with kids because it's not really difficult and there's lots of hands-on stuff they can get into. So these two little cookies right here are done just by hand, kind of like we did the chocolate chips. We're going to roll them into little balls and flatten them out and bake them. Then, by contrast, these perfect looking cookies is the exact same, but done as slice and bake. So we're going to put them into a log, put them in the fridge, and then slice them off. And you can do that into any thickness you like. That gives you lots of options. If you do them this way and slice them thinner, even thinner than these ones are, they actually make great sandwich cookies. So afterwards you can melt a little chocolate and stick them together. So you'll have some, you know, chocolate, pecan, or whatever nuts you're using, or a little bit of raspberry preserves or something, and they make a nice little sandwich cookie, peanut butter, whatever you want. So if we're going to do the log, it's just like I showed you last time. You're going to roll it, put it inside your plastic wrap or parchment paper, and put it into the refrigerator. To do the hand-rolled ones, we're going to roll them into balls again, whatever size you like. The other thing you can do with these, I have done yesterday in some I made, I did with candy cane and the white kisses. They're kind of like the cookies you see, the peanut butter blossoms. So you can do the same thing with this, with your nut dough, and then you would use a Hershey's Kiss. If you're going to do those, you add the Hershey's Kiss the last 5 minutes of baking. So you bake them halfway, and then you open the oven, and before you turn your tray, you just stick the Hershey's Kiss right into the middle of it, chocolate chip, whatever you wanted to do. I'm gonna do all of these by hand. For these, if you like traditional pecan sandies, and for a little bit of extra sweetness and crunch, once we get them all rolled, we can roll them in a little bit of granulated sugar before baking. These would also be delicious with some orange zest added to the dough. And you could roll them in cinnamon sugar instead of granulated sugar if you wanted to. So put them in for 5 minutes, then we'll rotate in another 5. It's 5 or 6 depending on the oven, but usually it's a total of around 10 to 12 minutes. And these cookies are easier to tell by taking a peek at the bottom than the top of the cookie. They're gonna start to just brown around the edges. A good example will be to show you one of the plain sugar cookies. I don't know if you can tell with the light, but see the bottom is golden brown. The top, it's not a lot of color, it's just starting to brown on the edges. Or one of the nut ones looks like this. Again, I don't know if you can tell, it's a little bit brown on the edges, and then it's brown on the bottom. So I usually press it out when I'm rolling anything. These we're gonna roll up like a cinnamon roll kind of. So a rectangle is the shape you want to end up with. So start by pressing it out into a rectangle, kind of as far as you can go without it really sticking. And if you pick it up and move it in between as you're going, it has less of a likelihood of like really sticking. And you're going to keep rolling it. If you move it and switch directions, there's a better chance of you keeping it even. Also, when you're rolling a rectangle or a square, if you do an X corner to corner every once in a while, it's going to help keep your dough a little more square. And you can use your pin on the edges. I don't know if you can see as I'm kind of pushing it in to square it up. These are small enough you can really use your hand. So once you have this, you want a rectangle and you want it in front of you so it's longer widthwise. Now here, you can sprinkle sugar straight on. You could put a little bit of water on it. If you have an extra egg and you're in your kitchen, that is going to be the easiest, is to take an egg and break it up and use a little bit of egg to stick your cinnamon sugar, just like you're making cinnamon rolls. But it will work fine without it. I did some yesterday. The swirls just aren't quite as defined without it. These ones I did yesterday without any egg or liquid. But so I just broke up an egg here just so I can show you. You want a really small amount. I'm just gonna spread. You can use your hands, a brush, a spoon, but just a really small amount of the egg. It's just enough to make it a little bit wet so the sugar sticks to it a little bit better. What happens if you don't have it is any water or egg or anything is the sugar, if it's a little bit dry, it makes it hard to get your roll like really nice and tight. It wants to kind of leave gaps, which makes it a little hard when you go to slice them. You're going to take cinnamon and sugar. If you have some already mixed together, great. If it's not, the ratio is really up to you. I like to do 1 to 4 or 1 to 3, so 1 part cinnamon to about 3 parts of sugar, which makes it a little bit on the darker side. You could add other spices to this if you wanted to make it more interesting. And instead of just doing cinnamon, you could add pumpkin pie spice or cloves or nutmeg into your sugar and do a spiced sugar. And I'm just going to put a thin layer of it right on top of the whole thing. At one edge, long ways, you're going to leave just about 1/4 of an inch just so that you can kind of get it sealed up. and everybody's different. I like to roll towards myself, so I'm actually gonna have to flip my dough. You want the naked edge to be wherever you're gonna end up, wherever you end your roll, not where you start it. Just gonna start by hand. You're gonna fold it over a little bit and then keep rolling, just like you're making cinnamon rolls. If it's not perfect, if it starts to break a little bit, that's okay. Push it back together. If you have paper, sorry it's gonna be noisy for a minute, you can use your paper to roll it. If you ever watch anybody make sushi, it's kind of the same idea. So now I have a complete roll. And it's okay if it looks a little cracked on the outside, or it'll all work itself out. You want to squeeze it, make sure if it feels like there's air pockets, you want to, squeeze it really good. So I'll show you, these are mine that I'm cooking right now. They're still very wet on top. They feel a little bit soft when I touch them. The undersides are brown. I can take these out now, they're gonna be fine. And this is gonna give me a cookie that's not quite as crispy. So I know, Marie, like you were saying, if you don't like them too crispy and crunchy, pull them out now. As long as the bottom is brown like that, you should be good. And that will give you a cookie that stays a little bit on the softer side. If you'd like them crispier, they can go back in until the edges start to brown. So now I'm going to take the roll that we just made. You can roll it right up in whatever you had it on, or wrap it in some plastic or in wax paper. And I'm just going to roll it up tightly. Close my ends off. And go ahead and put that in the fridge, and we'll go back and slice these in another 15 or 20 minutes. Okay. If you want to do some slice and bake, just the plain sugar cookie, but that has like a pretty outside, you're gonna roll your log, and then sanding sugar, cinnamon sugar. I'm gonna show you with pearl sugar, which is a specialty kind of sugar. You can buy it online. Some of this specialty stuff, I have a page. If you go on my website, it says shop. It's in a link to an Amazon page where I have like curated collections, and there's a specialty baking page that has all kinds of like glitter sugar and special sugars and things like that. Links to where you can find it on Amazon, because you can find everything on Amazon. So this pearl sugar you can get there. If you live in the Worcester area, the one place I know you can get this is in Holden, actually, at LaRue, which is kind of funny because I think most people think of them for meat and things like that, but they have a lot of specialty Swedish ingredients, and this happens to be one of them. This is pearl sugar. They use it for waffles and things like that a lot in Swedish countries. It doesn't really melt, so it's going to give you this like crunchy little sugar in the outside. But you can also use the colorful sugars that you can get in the supermarket. And all you're going to do is roll your log into whatever it is that you want to be on the outside. Flavored sugar is really nice. You can take some plain granulated sugar and grate orange or lemon zest into it. Mix it together really well and do this, and it's really nice. So then I'm just going to take this log, and just like with the other ones, we'll put it in the fridge, let it set, and then be able to slice them. Crushed up candy canes work good, but we'll do something else with those. I'm gonna roll that right up. And again, that's gonna go in my refrigerator. This is just the chocolate chip cookie doughs that we put in the first time. Same thing, kind of like the refrigerated cookie dough that you can buy. Again, but you have to remember that these ones don't really spread. So whatever size, whatever thickness you cut them to is more or less what they're gonna bake to. And then I have the one that we rolled with the sugar on the outside. Again, these are really pretty if you do colored sugars. but just so you can get an idea, you slice it and bake them off, and then you end up with this cookie that has the decoration already built in and a little bit of texture around the outside. Varying your flavors, again, just to kind of recap, you can vary the flavors of these cookies by individually kneading it into the pieces you broke off or into your original dough, but you can also vary the flavors by whatever you decide to swirl into the inside or decide to coat them with on the outside.